Okay. Is there a little recording icon somewhere? Okay, then we'll stick with that. Okay, all right. Hello again. Welcome to today's program on the right to repair. This is a hybrid program, so there will be a recording of this that'll be posted on our YouTube page within a couple days. If you, any of you people that are joining us online, feel free to ask questions at any time, and the moderators I have with me today will kind of pass those questions on to me. I'm pretty excited to talk about this program. This is it's an interesting issue for me personally. If you're not familiar with the right to repair, it's the idea that if we are unable to repair the things that we buy due to access to parts, restrictions within the software, all of these other things that we're gonna explore today, do we really own the things that we buy? So that's kind of what we're going to explore today. This is a program that kind of talks about legal things. It talks about some of the regulatory environment that we have coming out of both federal and state legislatures and other regulations. But this is our agenda for today. We're going to start by defining the problem. We're going to talk about what the right to repair is, where the issues arise when people try to fix things and they aren't allowed to. Then we're going to introduce a concept known as planned obsolescence, which is one of the major concepts surrounding the right to repair. And then from there, we're going to look at some of the regulatory environment, regulatory issues surrounding the right to repair. The major part of that will be what's called Nixing the Fix, which was a Federal Trade Commission initiative starting in 2019. And then we'll take a look at the current legislative landscape, both at the state and the federal level, before closing with me introducing you to some repair resources that you could take a look at, both from the St. Louis County Library and beyond as well, too. So, all right. So I am going to start with a little bit of a disclaimer today. As I said, this program cuts across lots of different boundaries that can be legal and political and all different kinds of things. And I am not a lawyer. I'm not a politician, not a lobbyist. I wouldn't even say I'm an expert in this subject. It's something of a personal interest, and I have researched it because a different part of my job involves doing school outreach. So I go to schools and I talk about how to do research. And most of the time I'm talking to students who are working on a social issues paper. So something where they have to pick a topic, argue a side of a point based on their research. And I kind of use this as an example often in classes. And then I thought there might be some interest at our branches. So I put together this presentation to kind of bring it to you today. So with that, let's get going for real this time. And we'll start with my research question. So something I always talk with students about is your research always starts with a question. And the question for us today is, like I said at the beginning, if you can't repair it, whatever that thing is, especially due to restrictions that the manufacturer sometimes artificially places on products, do you really own it? So that's what we're going to explore today. And let's start with a few examples that kind of give you an idea of what the problem is and how it works. The area where I first heard about this issue and where I think it's gained a lot of prominence in the news media is in the realm of agriculture and farmers. I've heard, we have this idea of farmers as these, very self-determined people, and they're always fixing their equipment and keeping things going, whatever the cost or in order to get the harvest done and stuff like that. But within the last 20 years or so, we started to hear more and more about farmers who aren't able to do that anymore. And I have an example up here on the screen of a farmer in Illinois. He's kind of central southern Illinois. I think his name was John Lieb. But he was the subject of a big investigative report from Investigate Midwest and NPR in April of this year, where he kind of described the problem he was having with some of his farm equipment. John Lieb has John Deere tractors, like the one that he's pictured right in front of. John Deere is one of the biggest agricultural manufacturers in the world, and particularly in Illinois. They have a huge footprint because, you know, they're headquartered in Illinois. John had just bought a couple new pieces of equipment, including a big combine, and he was getting ready for the harvest. I guess that was in late last year, and that combine broke down. And instead of being able to pop the hood and try to figure out what was wrong, because of the service contract that comes along with the combine, he's basically not allowed to touch anything in that piece of equipment, or he risks his warranty and all the money he has invested in it. So instead of being able to just fix it and get going, he had to call his authorized John Deere service provider, who he had to make an appointment with. That person had to come out to his farm at the rate of about $200 an hour. And all that person did when they got to his farm, is they had a laptop like the one in front of me with a special cable that he plugged into the tractor. It popped up on the computer exactly which sensor was broken. He swapped it out, and the combine was ready to go again. But because the owner of the equipment was not able to access that proprietary software, he didn't know what sensor it needed to be fixed, when all it was just like a fuse that you pop in and out. There's no specialty equipment or anything needed other than the software to diagnose it. So that is one of the biggest areas where you hear people talk about the right to repair, with farmers and people being locked into service contracts. He couldn't even if there was somebody locally that knew how to fix the tractor, if he's not an authorized John Deere person, then he's not allowed to work on it. But it's not just farmers. We've also seen this issue within medical equipment in the last couple of years, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. When hospitals were overrun with people, everybody was on ventilators, and were getting lots and lots of use all the time. That equipment breaks down. It's not because it's bad equipment, it's just getting a lot of use. And it needs to be fixed and maintained. But again, because of those restrictive service contracts, hospitals were not allowed to repair them on their own, even if they have somebody that has the expertise on staff that can fix it. So there's a big report about high demands on medical equipment failure, and how these repair restrictions kind of maybe cause bad health outcomes because of it. So those two examples are pretty specialized examples of how repair restrictions can get in the way of kind of our consumer freedom and consumer protections. But the big area in which I kind of became familiar with this topic was with consumer technology, like the things like our phones and our laptops, and all of those different devices that we interact with every day. This is another example of how people are kind of forced into really restrictive repair networks, whether that's to get the parts that they need to fix things, or the designs of the equipment doesn't lend themselves to repair. For example, batteries are usually the thing that goes wrong with cell phones first. Everything else still works. But because of how the batteries are designed into the piece of equipment, makes it difficult to fix them. The big issue with that, in my mind, is that these devices aren't really optional for people anymore. This is how a lot of people do all of the administration that they have to do in their lives. So like filling out government forms, filling out job applications, all of that stuff is done through some kind of internet connected device, whether it's a phone or a computer or something like that. And these tools are really expensive. And if you can't fix it, are you always going to be able to have a new one that can allow you to do to keep up with your work and your necessities as a as an adult in the world. Like I said, this is really where I got interested in the topic, because I've never had particularly high paying jobs, but I needed these things to kind of be able to live my life. And I didn't want to spend $1,000 on a phone every 4 years. I just wanted to put a new battery in it and have it working again. And we'll hear more about some of the restrictions in the phones later. But it's not just high-tech equipment either. This issue also applies to things like home appliances. Appliances, the average lifespan for home appliances used to be about 50 years. Like, I remember being in my grandma's basement doing laundry with her, with machines that were 40 years old when she bought them. According to Consumer Reports, home appliances now have an average lifespan of 5 to 10 years. So that's a huge difference in the lifespan of these pieces of equipment that we all use, and are, again, very expensive. And with appliances in particular, there's a couple reasons for it. One has to do with manufacturing techniques, is they just use different paint and things now. So like washing machines, for example, will rust more quickly. But they also design things into appliances that make them break more easily. So, for example, there could be like a little strip of lights on your washing machine, not even like a touch screen or fancy computers or anything like that, but just a little strip of lights that says where you are in the wash cycle. And if that strip of lights breaks, even though it has nothing to do with the operation of the machine, the entire machine won't work anymore. And then trying to repair that little bit of equipment costs $500-600. And then people are like, well, I'm just going to buy a new one. That's how the kind of the design is baked into these repair restrictions and the planned obsolescence that we're going to see in a second. But manufacturers will tell you that they offer warranties and things for their products. But a big research study in October of 2018 from the Public Interest Research Group found that 40 out of 50 home appliance manufacturers violated Federal Trade Commission guidelines regarding warranties. So that could be things like forcing people into restrictive repair networks. They seek to cover as little as possible. They put a very restrictive time limit on how long you have to sign up for the warranty. And they'll also do things like force consumers to cover their own shipping costs to send a washer or a dryer to an authorized repair facility. I don't know about any of you, but I'm definitely not going to do that. I'm going to go to Lowe's, I'm going to buy a new one, and I'm going to have them haul the old ones off. So this report really reinforced the notion that there's very little functional value to these warranties, even though that they offer them. So this is the manufacturer's perspective, that people want these kind of new flashy things, but some market research doesn't really back that up. From what I've been able to find in some of our market research resources, consumers overwhelmingly support repairability of products. In 2022, there were 3.2 billion views for repair content on YouTube, which can give you an idea of how much people are looking for this information. The repair service market is also expected to grow at a rate of about 6% in the next decade. And in a recent market research report, 56% of US respondents stated that they seek out sustainability practices of brands before making a purchase. So all of these things combined kind of show you that this is something that consumers are looking for when they're making these purchases and doing their research. but is not always backed up by what the manufacturers practice. And the biggest orientation for the manufacturers is a concept that's known as planned obsolescence, which is the idea that products are designed to fail in a certain amount of time to keep us buying things and to keep us within the market for these big purchases. They'll make new designs that have incompatible parts with previous versions. If we're talking about software products, they'll stop supporting software so that the digital devices are basically just paperweights at that point. And there's a lot of other ways that companies do this as well. This is not a new concept. It's not something that just happened when we started carrying around smartphones and stuff. It actually emerged in the 1920s when automobile manufacturers started seeing sales leveling off. Like a certain mass of people had bought cars at that point, and then they weren't buying new ones. So what they started doing is what I have in the previous bullet point, is they'd make new model year cars with totally incompatible parts and then stop making those old parts to force people to buy new cars rather than old ones. But the term itself, planned obsolescence, was coined in 1932 by a man named Bernard London. He was an economist, and he wrote a paper that it was titled Ending the Depression Through Planned Obsolescence. So this was his big idea for getting us out of those economic doldrums. Yeah, it was maybe, you know, he had good intentions, but not a little bit short-sighted. And basically his idea was when something broke, you would not attempt to fix it. You would not kind of go anywhere to hire a repairman or anything like that. You'd basically take that thing to a government facility. The government would basically give you a coupon or a tax credit that you would use to go buy a new version of it. But that obviously that coupon never covered the whole cost of what you were trading in. And usually you ended up spending more. But that was his idea to spur the economy on back in the 30s. At the end of this presentation, I'll link to a little research guide with all of my sources in it. And his paper is linked in there, and it's kind of an interesting read if you get interested in it. But in addition to these things, we also have the growing use of digital and software components in products that really kind of exacerbate repair difficulty. They're harder for the average person to repair, for one. For example, if you look at an old washing machine and you open it up and it's, oh, there's a belt that's broken, that's running the drum around. You kind of have an idea, okay, that's what I need to do to fix it. Whereas many fewer people know how to look at a piece of software and say, okay, this is what's wrong with this. Or how do I deal with all of these little computer chips and connections and stuff like that. And then in addition to just those physical and intellectual barriers, manufacturers also use software as a means to hide behind intellectual property and security claims. So they'll say, we can't give you this diagnostic software because that's our proprietary information. And if we let you into it, it's going to decrease the security of our products. That's their claims, and we'll come back to that in a few slides when we get to the FTC. But despite this concept of planned obsolescence, we also do have pretty long-standing consumer protections that are within this realm of repair and kind of consumer freedom. One of them is known as the eyeglass rule. It dates back to the 70s. And this one actually is enforced. And it's a rule that states that if you go to an optometrist and the optometrist checks your eyes and gives you a prescription, the optometrist is required to give you a written prescription that you can take to any glasses maker to fulfill that prescription. He can't keep that and then force you to buy glasses from them. So That is a rule that's pointed towards when people say you have to use authorized repair networks. Whereas we have this other area where we have these protections where we can take things anywhere. The other consumer protection that also dates back to the 70s is this Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act. And that was a Federal Trade Commission rule that stated that it had a provision in it called the anti-tying provision, where manufacturers could not tie warranty coverage to a specific part or authorized network unless they provided that service for free. So if they provide that warranty service for free, then they can tell you where you can and can't take things to be fixed. But if they don't, then they shouldn't be able to do that. That one has not been enforced regularly at all. But again, we'll come back to that when we get to the mixing the fix section. Does anybody have any questions of what I talked about so far? Before we get into some of the new changes in the last 10 or so years.
Well, I had some comments,
You okay?
so they're not really questions. I just want to provide some comments about some things that have happened with me,
Okay.
which are similar to what you're talking about. One was just a simple car remote, not
Mhm.
like a pop or something like that, a simple car remote. And I took it to a company, I won't name the company, but let's just say that they do a lot of battery replacements.
Mhm.
And I took them an identical one of these to repair, just to take the battery out. And in so doing, they broke the sort of the shelf for the
Mhm.
remote. They still haven't gotten back to me about replacing what they broke.
Oh, okay.
And so that was one situation where they were having trouble just repairing what they should have been able to repair. And not really owning up to, completing the task.
Yeah.
And it's the sort of thing where, I happen to have a spare, so I'm not gonna get into a big legal problem with them, but it's just annoying.
Yes.
Another thing is, and this is probably the worst thing, is I have two relatively new dehumidifiers. And when I say new, they're both probably less than 5 years old. They're both made by a big brand name, Frigidaire, actually, which is owned by Electrolux. The only way that you can get them repaired is through their authorized dealer, which is Sears Home Appliance. But if Sears Home Appliance doesn't have an office anywhere, you can't go to them
Mhm.
with your appliance and say, here, repair this. They come to you from
Oh,
somewhere,
yeah.
and you have no idea what they're gonna charge and whether or not it's worth them even coming based upon the value of what you have.
Mhm.
I called around to several repair shops and they basically said that company doesn't sell parts to us.
Mhm.
So I called all over town to see if there's an independent appliance repair that would repair these dehumidifiers. And no one could in the entire city of St. Louis. You have to use their authorized dealer where they have to come out, and who knows what's gonna happen when they do, and you don't know who's gonna show up.
Yeah, that's true. And those are exactly the kind of issues that we're talking about. Whereas if they just if they post a link to the repair manual somewhere online, that
Yeah.
told you what the parts and the prices of
Yeah,
those parts
yeah,
were,
right, yeah.
you could make those informed decisions
Mhm,
yourself.
yeah,
So,
right.
yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing we're talking about. And I'm glad you're bringing up cars, because that's one of the major developments in the last 20 years around this. So that's a good segue for us. But is there anything online? Okay, cool. All right. So yeah, this is that, we're gonna shift to about the last 10 years or so as this, the whole discussion around being able to repair your stuff has gotten larger and larger. And one of the big catalysts for the conversation around the right to repair was in 2012, the state of Massachusetts did a ballot initiative, which was question 1. And it had to do with the right to repair your car. In particular, it looked at the aftermarket automotive industry The question on the ballot asked voters if automakers should be required to provide the same vehicle diagnostic and repair information to both authorized repair facilities and independent repair facilities. This question passed with overwhelming support. 86% of voters voted in favor of it. And I can't think of another issue, in the last 15 or so years that would get 86% of support of anything. So again, automakers or voters, excuse me, are very in favor of having this independence and this consumer choice as well. This was a big catalyst across the country because it kind of scared automakers a little bit. They were worried that other states, as often happens, would see what happened in Massachusetts and start passing their own legislation around this topic. That would be, and what they would end up was basically a patchwork of 50 different laws that had 50 different regulations that they would have to follow. So I don't know if any of you have noticed this before. If you get like a can of paint from the hardware store, there's a disclaimer on it that says there are ingredients in this product that are known to cause cancer in the state of California.
Sure.
Obviously, we're not in California, but they just print that there because it doesn't make sense for them to do two sets of things. And that's kind of what happened in 2014 after the automakers saw this ballot initiative passed, is that the automakers and the repair industry signed a memorandum of understanding that stated that they would kind of use the Massachusetts law as a guideline that they would follow across the country, which they hope would kind of head off any other legislation, particularly around car repair and things like that. So as far as I'm aware, they have followed that. I think I saw kind of right at the end of my research, I didn't have time to incorporate it, that Massachusetts is maybe looking to make this a little bit more free. But I don't have my notes on that. So I don't want to say that for sure. But from there, this issue started to gain more and more traction within the middle of the decade. So there were a couple of developments that are kind of important to this issue in kind of the surrounding area, although it's not necessarily repair things directly. The first one was that in 2014, President Obama signed the Unlocking Consumer Choice and Wireless Competition Act. And that's the law that allowed you to buy a phone from whatever carrier. And if you were dissatisfied with that carrier, you could take that phone along with your phone number to any other network, which is something you couldn't do for the most part before. If you had to switch from T-Mobile to Verizon, generally you had to buy a new phone. So that act changed that so that you could keep your phone that you already paid for. In 2015, the Library of Congress added a few new exemptions to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And these all had to do with what's known as jailbreaking software. So for example, Apple iPhones, you can't like load apps onto them from the side, like you have to use their store and things like that. If you jailbreak your phone, which is you get kind of into the root software, you can do a little bit more of that kind of stuff. So this exemption added exemptions for jailbreaking phones, which is kind of seen as a repair-friendly change because it protected people from litigation, basically. Whereas before, if you jailbroke your phone, Apple could conceivably come after you and sue you for doing that kind of thing. So you had a few more protections there. And then in 2021, there are two big international developments. The first is that France creates a national repairability index, where a lot of big consumer purchases have to come along with repair information when you purchase them. So in the realm of home appliances, if you see that big yellow sticker on home appliances that tells you about their energy consumption and things like that.
Mhm.
In France, you would also have a score for how repairable that piece of equipment is. And that was a national law that they passed. And also in 2021, the UK passed a repair law for appliance manufacturers that stated that they had to provide parts to individuals for small repairs and to independent repair facilities for more complicated repairs. So again, kind of getting people out of those restricted networks. But the biggest development, and the one we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about now, is this workshop that the Federal Trade Commission hosted in 2019 that was known as Nixing the Fix. And it brought together repair advocates as well as representatives from different manufacturing industries to talk about this problem of how people are stopped from repairing their devices and things like that. The entire video of this workshop is available online. I have it linked in my source document, which again, I'll share a link with you at the end. It's only about 4 hours long. So I guess if you're really bored one night, you could watch it, but the report is pretty interesting to read as well. They also made things like this where it's a little more easy to digest. That kind of gets you at shows you what the big concepts they were talking about were in this. So you can see like up at the top here, access to reliable parts is a hurdle. If we go down here, battery cells designed in a specific way and are repaired in a specific way is another issue that they were talking about. And then you kind of have more from there from all the different parties that were involved. So here's John Deere, our example from the beginning. John Deere has many software locks, repairs are monopolized, and sales are competitive. I think that's what that says. I can't read it from the computer, but along with this workshop, the FTC did have to compile and present a report to Congress, which they did in 2021. And in this report, the FTC acknowledged that manufacturers discourage repair through several different ways, through product design, software locks, and restricted access to parts. They also stated that these manufacturers were frequently violating that anti-tying provision of the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act, and that they hadn't enforced it evenly.
Do you mind just clarifying again what that act is?
Yes, it has to state, it states that a manufacturer cannot tie warranty coverage to a certain network or facility or authorized repair facility, kind of like we've talked about that, unless they provide that repair for free. So that's the big issue, is that they are requiring people to go through these repair networks, but they aren't providing those repairs for free, which is what that act states.
Well, it sounds like a lot of the examples I gave are violations of that.
Yeah, I think you're right. And as they said, they frequently mention all of these violations.
Oh.
And we'll see it once more again when we talk about their decisions about it. So, yeah. And here's a little more detailed look at some of the repair restrictions. So there's things like physical restrictions. That can be like the batteries in your phone are glued in rather than put in with screws, so they can be hard to take apart and repair. The unavailability of parts, manuals, and diagnostic software, we kind of talk about that. Designs that make independent repair less safe. There could be things like telematics. So telematics are like lots of sensors. So if you drive a car that has like blind spot sensors, that's an example of telematics. which can be difficult to repair. Application of patent rights, a kind of regular disparagement of non-original parts. So even if people could provide the same parts, manufacturers will state that if you use third-party parts and then you bring it in to be fixed from an authorized spot, they won't work on it because you introduced third-party parts. Things like software locks. So this is one I've heard about recently, again, with Apple iPhones, is let's say you drop your phone and you crack your screen, and you find the part to repair that screen, and you put a new screen in and you start your phone back up, you'll start getting errors that say the parts don't match in the software in the way that they're supposed to, and that all of the features of the screen won't be available anymore because you've added a third-party part. That's called parts pairing, and it really is just a software thing. It has nothing to do with the parts. And then the final one was end user license agreements. So those are those things that you click accept to without ever reading them, because if we spent all of our time reading those, we'd never do anything else. But you can't do anything really if you don't accept those. So you have to. But and of course, the manufacturers had responses to all of these repair restrictions. As I've mentioned before, they speak to the protection of their intellectual property. They talk about safety, and that's again where they disparage third-party parts. They talked about liability and reputational harm. So if they say that if somebody repaired something from an independent facility and then that thing broke or it acted in a way that hurt somebody, that would open them up to liability in a different way. And then the design choices and consumer demand drive the repairability of devices, and the quality of service. In my mind, speaking personally, I don't buy any of those except the design choices one. I do kind of understand that one because, people want thinner phones and flashier things, and touch screens are fun and, stuff like that. But I think if you ask most people, would they rather have a phone that was a few millimeters thinner, or that you could replace the battery easier? I think most people would probably say, let's replace the battery a little bit easier. But I've been talking for 40 minutes about how I think we should repair things. So maybe I'm biased. I am willing to admit that. So these are the manufacturer's explanations, but in their report, the FTC states very bluntly that there is scant evidence to support manufacturers' justifications for repair restrictions. Basically, the manufacturers could not demonstrate that they had been harmed by any of these third-party restrictions. So they were just kind of talking to talk rather than having something to say. And coming out of this report, there were a couple big major actions that again kind of support the growing right to repair movement. The first is that President Biden appointed an outspoken critic of big tech. Her name is Lina Khan, to the FTC. This repair is one of the things that she talks a lot about. She also talks a lot about breaking up those big tech monopolies, but that's a different subject. And then also in 2021, Biden signed Executive Order 14036 to promote competition. And that executive order had a couple of things in it. One is that it directed the Department of Defense to avoid buying equipment that had repair restrictions on them, so that our military could, fix stuff in the field, rather than, I guess, having an authorized repair person like on base or something like that. And it also the executive order encourages the FTC to use its regulatory power to address third-party repair. It kind of did that later in the year. The FTC issued a unanimous decision, and that included 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans, on a policy statement on their plan to enforce right to repair. like a lot of things that we sometimes hear from these regulatory bodies, it was pretty light on details. And it mostly reiterated the report, the nixing the fix report that they talked about. But it does state that it will actually attempt to enforce that anti-tying provision of the MMWA. But it's not really clear at all how it's going to do that, or like what the penalties will be. So who knows if that'll work from the federal level. But the biggest development that came out of this report is that it really did kind of spur state legislatures into action. And there's been a couple of big laws that have passed in the last few years that all have to do with right to repair. In 2022, New York passed the Digital Fair Repair Act, which covers consumer electronics. There was a little bit of controversy around that one. We're between the New York legislature and the governor's signature. The governor did some like line item amendments to it that people think are a bit more friendly to device manufacturers than they are to consumers. So maybe doesn't go far enough in some people's minds, but it was a big deal when it passed. And then in 2023, 3 different states have passed right to repair legislation. Colorado covers agricultural equipment. Minnesota covers home appliances. And the California one was much more broad. And then in 2024, Colorado added digital equipment to their right to repair restriction or legislation. And Oregon passed a bill that banned parts pairing. So that's what I was talking about with like the phone screen and getting errors if you replace your phone screen. That's called parts pairing. And Oregon has banned that. Even though it hasn't passed yet, we do have legislation. We have had legislation in our Missouri Senate as well, too. Senator Tracy McCreary, I believe she said she introduced a right to repair bill in the previous 2 legislative sessions, and plans to do so again, I think. But it hasn't quite passed yet. You know, these things take time. But it is my little civic engagement reminder. If this is something that you care about, do reach out to your elected representatives to say that you support it. Otherwise, they might know that this is an issue on the minds of their constituents. But even beyond Missouri, even more states are kind of looking at right to repair as a protection for their state citizens. So these are all the states that have current or introduced right to repair legislation in their state legislatures. If you're interested in what some of those other bills look like, one of the links in the research guide I'm gonna provide for you has a big list of all the bills and things that you can take a look at. So hopefully we get it here in Missouri soon, and we will have a few more protections as consumers, and we can get back to fixing them and maintaining our stuff a little bit better. That is kind of the information part of the presentation. Does anybody have any questions or comments from here?
So the states that have actually passed legislation are very few. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if this is following a political agenda or not, but those were all kind of left, we'll say left center politically states. Is there reason for conservative states having difficulty passing this legislation? Is this a political kind of issue or not?
I don't know that I could really speak to that. You know, I don't really see it as a political issue. I do see it as a lobbying issue. So like maybe those states are getting more lobbying money from, you know, the manufacturers and stuff like that. But I couldn't say
You can also
it's a
see that
political-
farming states,
Mhm.
central states are where the legislation's been introduced. But
Yeah.
I think Colorado, of all those states in the center,
Yeah.
passed it.
Yeah, that's true. So, yeah, I don't.
Kind of wondering what the problems are in getting that passed in all those states
Mhm.
was introduced.
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's hard to know sometimes. I, I think the states that have passed it, they do tend to, those are the states that tend to pass that type of legislation a little
Mhm.
ahead of a lot of other states. And the nice thing is it's their, especially New York and California have a lot of kind of sway in what they end up looking at. You might get longer looks in some of the other states too.
Mhm.
But it's a growing thing, and hopefully it just kind of continues to grow. All right. So I have a couple of repair resources for you if you want to take a look at them. I have a couple examples of products on here that are good examples of repairability and how consumers might be looking for this as well. These two images in the middle, this laptop and this phone, are both products that are designed to be kind of repaired and have parts replaced, and you keep most of the thing, you just upgrade what you need to. So in the example of the phone, maybe you want a nicer camera on your phone, you can just replace the camera module. Or like with the laptop, that's called the framework laptop. You can just pop different components in and out of like actual sockets rather than everything being soldered together to keep things very small. And then this coffee maker over here is another example. The company offers all of the parts of the coffee maker individually. So you could just buy, the water container here, and everything is put together with screws and things rather than all being like one piece of injected molded plastic. I want to show you iFixit really quick. If any of you are unfamiliar with iFixit, it is one of the big repair advocates in the country, and they did a lot to kind of bring attention to this, and they are really focused on repairability. So if we go up here to fix your stuff and then repair guides, you get an idea of all the different things that they have repair guides for. So here's probably the most common ones. And then get things down here below. But let's take a phone, for example. And I've been talking a lot of trash on Apple. So let's look at Android too. Here's a Samsung. Let's do this Galaxy S. And let's say you have this phone, and click in here, and it gives you different little guides for replacing different components. These are usually made by individuals. It's kind of like Wikipedia in that way, where people do these themselves. But for example, this battery replacement is very easy. So that's nice to see. It looks like all you have to do is open the back. Is this a really old phone? And it's a really old phone? Okay. Let me get another example. Oh. Okay. Down here. Okay. Oh, yeah, that was a really old one. Okay. 23, this one, look at this one. Okay. So here's the battery draining fast. They don't have any repairs for this one. My examples are not working out today, guys, sorry. I'll go back to Apple and trash on. Okay, here we go. So here's all of the different guides that you can do. So there's battery, front camera, screen. Let's take a look at the screen. Load in here. So this one tells you it'll take about an hour. It's a moderately difficult repair. So if you've never repaired a phone before, you might want to find a broken one to practice on. It'll also tell you what you need, both as parts and tools. And you can link out directly to their store to buy them. You don't have to, you can buy the parts from anywhere. But yeah, you need a hair dryer to melt the glue, basically. And then you get kind of step-by-step pictures for repairing things. So it's worth a try, I think, especially if you have something that's a little broken. May as well pop it open and try to repair it. But they also have things like appliances and stuff as well. But we also have great resources for repairing things here at the St. Louis County Library. I have some examples of some of the databases that we have that have repair information in them. ALLDATA is a database that is for car repairs. So if you know your make and model and you know what's wrong with your car, you can kind of get all the repair information that you need to fix it. It is also useful for if you're like me. I'll fix computers all day, but if it comes to a car, I don't know anything about them. But what I can use ALLDATA for is like if I take my car into my mechanic, they tell me what is wrong and how much it's going to be to fix it. I can come into ALLDATA and actually find that information, basically what the part is going to be needed, as well as the hours and the labor that you can find in there as well. Yeah, so that's a pretty good one. You do have to be in the library to access this one. You can't access it from home. We also have small engine repair, which is more for like lawnmowers and boats and stuff like that. We have a database called Sam's Technical Publishing. Sam's has been around forever. They've done repair manuals. They used to be print, but it is good for things like vacuum cleaners and electronics like TVs and stuff like that. You can get repair information. And then we also have Skill Mill, which is a database where you can learn about, it's actually for learning the skilled trades, but it does have information for like house repairs in it. So plumbing, it does have a home appliance section, which I actually did use to fix my dad's oven. So it is pretty useful. And then this picture over here on the right-hand side of the screen is the brand new creative space at the Clark family branch, which just opened a couple weeks ago. And I put this in here because the creative space has 3D printers in it. And 3D printers are something that if you get really, really into repairing things are useful because you can make parts over with it. I don't think I'll ever get that far into it, but it is, you know, it's nice to know that it's there. And that brings us to the end. The last thing I want to show you, get my mouse in the right spot. Oops, I'll do it a different way. Is the research guide. And if you registered for this program with your email address, I'm going to send out a link to this by the end of the day. Okay, so that's not there. So it looks like this. All of my presentation slides are linked in here if you want to revisit them. And it has all of the sources that I use to put this presentation together. So going back to my teaching students about research, this is kind of my works cited page. So that you know I'm kind of not just making anything up. So for example, if you want to learn more about nixing the fix, the video is linked right here, as well as the full congressional report. And then I also have, you know, some of our other things in here. So this is that warranties in the void research report that talked about appliance manufacturers, and there's just a lot of sources in here. So get back to, here we go. All right. But I thank you all for coming. I hope it was interesting for you. And does anybody have any other questions or comments they'd like to add before we wrap it up? All right.
Thank you.
Cool. You're welcome. Thanks for coming.
Appreciate it, Cameron.
You're welcome. Yeah. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna stop the recording now.